Welcome back, everybody. I'm Austin.
I'm Duncan.
I'm Bryce.
On the mind this week is the final presidential election update. Oh my
Possibly the
lord.
final presidential election.
After this one, I think that might not be a bad thing.
Yeah, we'll have something akin to North Korea's Kim Jong-un or else. So, I believe we're starting with the unfortunate case of Donald Trump.
Indeed.
Okay, I saw him talking about his support from women yesterday.
Yeah, and I mean, that's one of those things that people assume that there is, no woman in this country who would possibly vote for him. Because, I mean, obviously he has made some incredibly sexist comments.
His core voters, however, probably are married
Correct.
to what I'm going to assume are very unfortunate women. And they probably take up their husband's positions.
Actually, I'm going to say it's not necessarily, and I mean, I'm sure in some cases that's entirely accurate, but what we have to remember about Donald Trump supporters is that these are usually people who, especially on an economic level, feel that the country has sort of left them behind. So,
And in a way, they're not wrong.
in a way, they're not wrong, but I think that Donald Trump's solutions are probably not the answer to that problem. But be that as it may, especially in the Rust Belt states, Ohio, the support areas that he has in Pennsylvania, places that used to be centers of heavy industry, you do end up with a lot of people who have lived in these towns their entire lives, and they've seen the livelihoods that they got used to in the 1950s, 1960s, 1970s continue to go downhill. So there is also a geographic and experiential component to the mentality of supporting Donald Trump. Now, again, whether those are the right solutions is very much in question. But I think you do have to recognize that it's not just people who are saying, okay, my husband's voting for Donald Trump, I too, therefore, am going to vote for Donald Trump.
What's your take on that, Bryce?
I agree with Duncan. I've heard a lot of people, like you said, kind of like in this state of not liking the government or not believing that the government has a lot to offer them. And these people generally have gone in one of two directions, either Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders. And now the Bernie train has left the station. It's gone. It's not ever coming back. We've done our crying about it, but now it's time to man up and focus on the solutions anyway. So I guess what I'm saying is these aren't women who are just blindly following their men. It's part of a culture where people don't think that either the Republicans nor the Democrats have anything to offer them. Here's a candidate who, although is running as a Republican, is not liked by the Republicans. Everybody knows that.
He's generally well hated.
Yes. And so they think that his sort of new take on things is the answer.
New to the political world, maybe? I wouldn't, maybe to the national stage of politics. I don't think anyone this hateful has ever really ran for president.
Pat Buchanan, to some degree, was sort of the, I guess, if we want to apply this word, intellectual predecessor of Donald Trump. I'm not sure I like that word in this context, but
I would say that maybe in relation to social levels, we're far more tolerant now than we were 10, 20 years ago.
in some things at least, yeah.
Yeah.
I would like to add also, I've been seeing this meme a lot on Facebook. A picture went viral of a woman and a man each holding up signs. The woman's sign said "Women for Trump," and the man's sign said "Gays for Trump." And then there were a whole bunch of other pictures tagged. It was a woman saying, or she would hold up a sign that says "Deers for hunting," or
Trees for deforestation.
yeah, things like that. It was really funny.
Polar bears for global warming. Yeah,
Yep.
I've seen those.
Now, actually, one thing that does sort of bring up is that as much as he's generally hated by minorities, Trump does have some small degree of support. I mean, there are groups, Latinos and Latinas for Trump, African-American groups, especially his support in the African-American community comes almost exclusively from African-Americans who are very, very religious, who have sort of jumped onto him as part of more of the evangelical wing of the Republican Party, rather than for his stance on social issues pertaining to race relations.
It always astonishes me that he gets so much support from the evangelical sector.
Yeah, and
I think they just see him as opposing abortion, and they just assume he supports everything else that evangelicals will.
yeah, and actually you and I were discussing this.
Right.
I sort of made a massive life mistake, and to see what Donald Trump supporters thought about Donald Trump's positions, I actually joined a very pro-Donald Trump Facebook group because I was thinking, okay, this is a large enough group, it's geographically diverse, can kind of get some statistical ideas of what people actually think about Donald Trump. And the majority of the discourse that took place in this particular group centered around religious issues, and in many cases, things that people had simply assigned to Trump that he has never really said much about one way or another, or if he has, it's been very limited, and they then extrapolated it to match up with their own religious views.
That's something I was going to say about this election in general, is there wasn't much, if any, solid policy laid out in any of the debates. They never
Almost
really
none.
came out with solid plans at all.
The first few minutes of the first debate, it almost looked like maybe they were going to try to get into economic policy, but I think we all got very disappointed in that very, very quickly.
If I remember right, the first few minutes of the first presidential debate between Hillary and Donald was where he impressed me the most.
Not saying a whole lot, but I would agree.
Yeah, like,
If I can come in Donald Trump's defense, although
my
I
God.
I really don't want to say that. So as far as evangelicals go, he is, I don't want to say necessarily afraid of, but expresses possible solutions, although he's not really coming up with possible solutions. He's just saying these are the problems and I'm going to fix them. He doesn't say how, but problems such as ISIS or refugees, things that evangelicals are generally very afraid of, as well as abortion. Evangelicals tend to really hate that idea, as we've seen. And what else? Oh, he's talked about also making it legal for churches to officially endorse a candidate.
the Johnson Act, if I remember right.
Yeah, so that's why the Bible Belt really loves Trump.
Okay. I also just want to point out, I don't see him really coming up with solutions so much as attacking his opponent. And I think that goes both ways. We'll get to Hillary later, unfortunately. It just really shocks me, honestly, that our first real chance to vote for a candidate, I think it was pretty clear that Obama was probably going to get his re-election. So this is our first chance to influence any decisions. It's kind of awful that we have to choose between these two.
Although one's interested in the very hypothetical scenario of what if Mitt Romney had decided to run this year.
Well, obviously, he's a weak candidate. Just ask Trump.
Of course.
I don't think he would have done much better, honestly. And just because I don't want to say that the Republicans' extreme base really took off with their party, but it kind of did.
Oh, there's no kind of about that.
As soon as I saw Trump pulling well at all, it just blew me away. And then he took off with the party, and he's got him pretty well on his grasp right now. It's just kind of disappointing. I used to prescribe myself back in the day to the Republican Party.
As did I.
Mm-hmm. And to see it taken away by what I see as a raving madman just throws me off.
Which, I mean, I know we're kind of, getting to Hillary here, but that does bring up the interesting question. What does the Republican Party look like after this year? Because, of course, they're going to have, whether they win or lose, they're going to have a massive crisis management problem on their hands after this election. So one does sort of wonder what they're going to look like in the aftermath of 2016.
I really hope it shakes up the incumbents. I really do. I think we need new ideas in Congress, and we need people that actually understand economics and how to relate it to the problems that Americans have. Because right now we just have people that are really good at getting votes and not offering solutions.
Personally, I'm sort of hoping that the more moderate branch of the Republican Party starts to filter into the Libertarian Party. I think that could be a big opportunity for them, with the Republican Party as it is having gone off to the social extremes in a lot of
Tea
cases.
Party extreme. That's how I feel about it. I've talked to people older than me about this, and they think the Republican Party is going to be just fine. I think that they're going to have a split. And I honestly think the Libertarians are going to be the new Republican moderate.
You know, I'm sure in 1855 everyone thought the Whigs were going to be just fine.
I really do think the Libertarians are going to be where most Republicans prescribe from here on out. I hope, at least. They honestly have better ideas than...
Fingers firmly crossed.
Firmly.
Yeah.
I see the Republican Party right now kind of like their counterparts, the Green Party. And I see the Libertarians' counterpart being the Democrats. And I think that's kind of an important comparison because the Democrats are the more moderate version of the left wing. So it's going to be interesting seeing if Republicans come around to being moderate again.
Yeah. Some of them still are. But...
I'm going to disagree with that later.
Later? Okay.
I mean, I can
fine.
do it right now.
If it goes in with your
I can do
ending
it
statement, then
real
no.
quick.
Okay.
I believe that the duopoly of Republicans and Democrats has created a huge mess of government spending that is no longer necessary, and Duncan will talk a lot about that. The Libertarian Party really likes to weed out what's not necessary, and that's a great thing. Getting rid of government spending that is no longer needed, that should be like a top priority. And the Green Party wants to do that. We want to make things safer, which means, say, less lawsuits, less cleaning up oil spills, less spending towards that sort of thing, less privatized prisons, a better, more effective prison system, which means less people in prison. Yes, time? Okay.
All right. Well, I'm assuming that's going to tie in with your closing statement.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that was where it was going. Sorry about that. Anything else about Donald? Honestly, I don't know.
No, I think we can move on. I mean,
Yeah.
how else to sum him up by just describing a lot of bad things?
The angriest orange, I believe, is the best description I can come up with him.
The angriest orange.
Yeah.
I suppose one final thought on Donald Trump before we sort of move on from him is that, you know, love him or hate him, which I think all of us in this room fall into the latter category, but he really has grabbed onto a section of the electorate, and I do not mean that as a double entendre, by the way, guys. But he really has, you know, found a section of the electorate that very much agrees with his positions, if you want to call him that. So I think there's a misconception that on November 9th, if Hillary Clinton wins, Donald Trump goes away. And maybe Donald Trump as an individual figure does sort of recede into the background at that point. I think we are going to be dealing with the political base of Donald Trump in this country for some time to come, because these are people who, again, maybe whether they're right or wrong, really do have very strong political views on what Donald Trump has presented to them.
It's actually really well summed up, actually. Well, let's go ahead and move on to the second deplorable, if you will. Hillary Clinton. You know what, Bryce? You want to start off with her? Because I know you like her so much.
Sure. She is a little bit harder to sum up in, say, a paragraph or two. I would like to say I've seen a lot on social media and also the media, such as just like NBC and stuff. People will describe a lot of bad things about Trump, a lot of his scandals, and then they'll say, then Hillary with the emails. And keep in mind, she's had a lot more scandals than just the emails. The quote-unquote rigging of the DNC primaries. Now, we've had an episode on this, and it wasn't technically rigged, but there's a lot of foul play going on that wasn't technically illegal, but we'll move past it. Do you guys want to chip in on some other bad things Hillary's done?
People like to harp on Benghazi.
Yes.
Although I would argue that people like to harp on Benghazi in microcosm and don't look at the destabilization of Libya in macrocosm to the degree that they should.
Right. That's a good point. I will say that she's come under a lot of attacks that she doesn't truly deserve. My coworker the other day was talking about how they uncovered an underground sex network in Haiti, and they tried blaming it on the Clinton Foundation, and I was just like, wow, really?
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that got debunked pretty quick, but
Yeah, or we have a group Facebook chat that we were all part of, and last night I just had to vent to these guys because the extreme far right was, and WikiLeaks was part of this, mind you, which this shows how little due diligence they're doing these days. The extreme far right was actually accusing Hillary Clinton of what was in effect witchcraft. Like satanic occultism, participating in satanic rituals.
I remember how disappointed you were. I think that's what broke
her
you through
and
this election,
Beyonce
right?
and Jay-Z.
Yeah, it really did just
Wait.
make me think, when did we go back to 1694? And are we going to call spectral evidence into courts again?
Second, Donald Trump said, "Yeah, I'll run for president."
Speaking of Haiti, one thing that is not debunked and is true, and although you can't necessarily relate it directly to Hillary Clinton, when the earthquake in Haiti happened, the Clinton Foundation donated and built a lot of homes there in Haiti. I think they're similar to what we would consider trailer homes, but the foundation that they use to build these homes, they used very bad materials, and these homes were known to fall apart very often, even injure a lot of people, and also they were filled with asbestos. So a lot of people from Haiti have come up to protest Hillary Clinton rallies and stuff like that.
I bet Trump supporters are conflicted on whether to support them being here or not. Yeah, I will say, in terms of experience, vastly outweighs Donald Trump. If I were to give candidates a rating from 0 to 10, Trump would have a solid 0. Hillary would maybe have a soft 3, 4 on a good day.
I was gonna say I'd
Is this out
actually
of
give
10?
her. I'd give her about a
Yeah,
4
10.
out of 10
Oh, okay.
on a really good day if I was in a good mood.
Right. If I was in a really good mood, the economy was going up, I'd say, yeah, maybe Hillary isn't so bad. But her trustworthiness is so low for me.
I was thinking about this on my way over here, actually. I gave her a 50% F. Now, this is a little bit of a different scale, but it's percentage-wise, it's, I guess, just one higher than Duncan, two higher than
I know,
Austin.
and people like to think of it as a race between equals, and it's really not.
No. See, it's funny because you say something bad about Clinton and all the Trump supporters are like, yeah. And you're like, no, not. And then you say something bad about Trump and all the Clinton supporters are like, yeah. And you're like, no, get away.
I mean, so revisiting
They're
as
both
to
awful.
revisiting as to whether or not this is a race between equals, I would argue that they're not equals in terms of their experience, but that they are kind of equal in their potential to damage the country, albeit in completely different ways. I mean, they are two very, very different people, but I think that the potential damage from each one, although it would come in very different forms, is about equal.
Mm-hmm. I would like to point out that Trump would probably ruin us domestically. Mm-hmm. I think Clinton would absolutely get us embroiled in foreign conflicts we have nothing to do with.
See, my concern is more the degree of damage over time. The way I see it, a Donald Trump presidency would be a total disaster for about 4 years, but his lack of legislative experience and the fact that most of what he would do would be flagrantly unconstitutional would mean that nothing he did would stand up as a long-term policy after his administration had ended. Hillary Clinton really does have the legislative experience to, put together big new government spending programs, big new agencies, that sort of thing, that really could have a role to play in American politics, be it good or bad, for, 30, 40, 50 years from here on out. So I think you do have to look at whether the damage is going to be very quick. In other words, do we peel off the Band-Aid all at once, or do we sort of inch it along and feel the pain for a long time?
Now, we've talked about the Supreme Court recently, and
What an awful year for an election between two crazies.
Say Trump does become president and does elect a Supreme Court that's very partial to him. Perhaps there would be a little bit longer lasting damage.
I do actually agree with that, but on the other hand, I think you could make the same argument with Hillary Clinton, since they've both expressed very politicized views of the Supreme Court. I would argue that they're probably both going to have long-term and largely negative impacts through the Supreme Court. So
I would lean towards Clinton just for the fact that she'd push through Obama's appointee, I'm sure. And he would be
we would hope.
We would hope. I honestly believe she would, just because she wants to keep the Obama vote for her reelection.
While we're on the topic of the Supreme Court and talking about Clinton, I've heard on the news lately that John McCain is leading sort of a attempt.
Pitchfork mob?
What?
A pitchfork mob?
No,
An obstructionist bloc, basically.
Yeah, as to essentially let the Supreme Court die out if Hillary were to become president.
Was Cruz a part of that? I'm sure.
Possibly.
I think I read something about that.
A lot of Republicans. I don't know.
The same
exactly
guy that read Green Eggs and Ham for a filibuster? Yeah, that guy. I'm taking him super seriously. Vote your conscience, Bryce.
I mean, don't judge what they're using to filibuster. Judge the filibuster itself.
It was still awful. Yeah, I think the obstructionism, representative democracy can't work if we refuse to let it. If we just continually say, no, nothing's going to change. Our government was made to change with the times. We have to roll with the punches. We have to keep growing, keep innovating. We have to allow laws to protect our people, but at the same time, not obstruct business. So the fact that nothing's been happening for the past 8 years almost, I'm glad that our economy is growing.
Sounds like you're saying it's Obama's fault.
Thanks, Obama. No, it's not. Really, it's not, because Congress hasn't done anything. And they continually say, we're not going to compromise with Obama. And that's part of the problem.
Now, see, I would like to kind of just illuminate a little bit of that. Even though we do definitely need to have the obstructionism in Congress and between the executive and legislative branches stopped, it is interesting to note that we have a legislative load these days that is massive. I mean, so many new laws, so many new bills are proposed and passed each year under normal circumstances that it's very difficult to keep up with the changing circumstances. And ideally, we really shouldn't need to have that kind of legislative activity going on at all times when it isn't necessarily needed. So, to a degree, a lower legislative load is a good thing if the two parties can, in times when it is needed, work together to come up with legitimate solutions.
That's what you and I talk about quite often, is we overregulate ourselves. And then we're stuck with those laws without the willingness to get rid of them.
Right.
That's why we're stuck with some taxes that really are obsolete. You see it happen all the time, honestly. I can't think of a specific case. Can you point out one?
In terms of policies that are just no longer really
relevant, but still affect our wallet.
Yeah, well, I mean, let's go with the very obvious one, which is the war on drugs, which is, I mean, a leftover of the 1980s and 1990s and political philosophies that date back substantially farther than that. We've gotten to the point that the majority of our populace does not care about whether or not people smoke marijuana in terms of it being a legal issue. And yet our government has continued to pursue this policy that's from, a period that's 20, 30 years ago that we don't need anymore, doesn't accomplish anything, and actually depletes the potential source of tax revenue that marijuana sales would be.
Not only that, but it sends people to jail and takes them out of the workforce.
And costs taxpayer money in the process to jail them, yes.
I feel it's appropriate to quote Season 1, Episode 1 of The Wire. The war on drugs isn't a war, because wars end. That's our deep moment for this evening. Continue.
I mean, look at our conflicts in the Middle East, Bryce, do they? Okay, enough of that joke. Apparently not funny enough. Something I will say that Hillary's got going for, I think it's because of her overconfidence with the election, but also because she's not a complete political, well, you know what, I take that back. She said that Donald Trump will not concede, or says he won't say he will concede to the election results unless he wins. And that's a good point. That's scary, because that gets his core base just riled up. he keeps talking about how the election's rigged and everything, and I completely understand where Clinton's coming from. That's horrifying. It really is.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. I mean, if you're going to run in a democratic process, you do need to at least accept the results of that democratic process.
I can more or less see both sides of this. Now, again,
Let me defend Donald Trump for the second time.
Make America great again, damn it. So, again, the DNC primaries weren't technically rigged in any sort of illegal way, but the media did declare a winner before it was actually, before official, and other such things. They try to paint Bernie as an atheist, things like that, just to sort of steer votes away from him towards her. I will say, I don't think any of that's going on in the general election, because it doesn't need to. I think that Trump is as crazy enough that all the media has to do is just, literally their job. And he's not being painted in any sort of bad light, is what I'm saying. He's being shown in his natural light.
So one thing that's important to bring up, and I mean, I'm sure anyone who listens to this regularly kind of knows that you and I disagree on, whether the media kind of has that latitude to do that. But Trump has made it very clear that he does not think that this is a perception issue or, Hillary using her influence with some group to paint him negatively. He's made it pretty clear that he actually thinks that something that would qualify as legitimate voter fraud is going to occur.
Yeah, you're right.
Which, I mean, that's kind of beyond that argument, because he's actually alleging that something that is flagrantly illegal would take place.
There have been cases of voter intimidation for groups that support him, saying, go look at these polls, go police them. And
yeah. And that's actually,
illegal.
That is a very concerning thing, because now, you guys know I'm a very law and order type of person. Not to sound like Donald Trump.
Right,
I'm a legitimate one. Unlike him.
Why don't you run for president? You're not old enough.
Duncan Ryan, make America great again.
Duncan Ryan, let the government leave you alone. But anyway, I think in a democracy there really is a fundamental question of what point, that kind of voter intimidation. I have to say this: if people are being heckled at polls and in some way being prevented from going in and voting as they would, I think in a democracy you really do have something of a legitimate duty to, in the best and most reasonable way possible, but to get past that and go vote as you would anyway, because setting the precedent that some sort of voter intimidation of people watching polls and asking everyone who goes in, who are you going to vote for, et cetera, trying to in some way sway the results that way, setting that precedent and allowing it to be gotten away with is an incredibly, incredibly dangerous idea.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's just going to proliferate in the future. It's probably going to get worse, too. People see that they're going to get away with it. They're going to keep doing it. But I'm sure that's the argument for the war on drugs, too. So
True.
I don't know. I feel like we've harped on him enough. Oh, wait. We were supposed to be talking about Clinton.
Yeah.
Even when we're talking about Clinton, we start harping on Trump. And we don't even like Clinton.
More about Clinton. Her outfits during the debates were on fleek.
Oh, man.
You guys are just really quiet, so I just threw something in there.
This is a problem I've had with Clinton the entire campaign for her. When she went on, was it Ellen, and did the whip and nay-nay? I almost had a stroke.
She does what it takes to get elected, damn it.
Even if that means getting rid of all self-worth, I guess. Self-respect.
Whatever it takes.
Yeah. Go ahead.
So I'm sorry, getting back to policy a little bit here. I'm sorry, I have
it's
to.
not a policy to
whip a nene?
Yeah.
No, it is not a policy.
come on. Aren't you a fellow kid?
No.
Not even at heart. Okay.
No. But anyway, kind of getting back to the policy thing here, there is a very interesting question as to, if elected, what Hillary Clinton would actually do in terms of governing the country. I mean, we know that she's reversed herself on several positions, the most notable of them being her initial support and then later rejection of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. There is a very interesting question as to, if elected, how she would govern. I mean, Bill Clinton similarly ran nowhere near as far to the left as she did, but he did run a little bit to the left and then moderated to the center, mostly through the interference of Newt Gingrich as Speaker of the House of Representatives during the Clinton administration. But we do have to wonder how her administration would handle stuff.
I think that's going to be up to the Bernie-crats and the people that are far more liberal than her, that don't want to vote for her but are probably going to end up voting for her, to just continue hawking her. It's really going to come down to just stay on her, because if you don't, she's going to be almost a right-leaning moderate.
On the other hand,
traditional right-leaning.
On the other hand, if she doesn't moderate somewhat, I mean, even most of the Democrats in Congress are not as left-leaning as the Bernie Sanders supporters, etc. So she does still have to work with Congress to get things done if they want some of their policies implemented.
No, she definitely will. I'm saying that I feel she's going to disregard all of the Bernie-crats, please. Yeah. And that will not get her reelected, I don't believe.
I think that she is so disrespected among all like Republicans, anyone sort of right-leaning, and even a lot of the extremely left-leaning people, more progressive before it was cool to be progressive people. I don't think that she'll actually get a lot done. I mean, we talked about the Supreme Court justices, that if the House stays Republican, that they might just not accept anyone she suggests, just almost out of spite, because they're sick of these Democrat policies over and over again, which is crazy because things have gotten a lot better. We're now in a record so many months with job growth. I can't remember.
What was it? 73?
Oh boy, I can't remember exactly what that.
Quite a few.
That sounds right to me.
It was, quite a few. Yeah.
So, I mean, even though that's crazy, but I mean, if the House stays Republican, she might not get anything done just out of spite, which is sad.
That wouldn't surprise me, because that's what they've been doing with Obama, more or less.
I'm not going to lie. That's sort of what I'm hoping for. That's like my dream end of this election.
Honestly, if we kept the same Congress, I'd almost be happy with either candidate being elected, because nothing would get done.
Again, though, that's one of those rare instances where obstructionism can be a very good thing.
Right, and that's how they felt this entire time. They honestly think Obama's the Antichrist. A few of them have said it. And for the actual Antichrist, in my eyes, to run, I feel it's only justice that he has to deal with this Congress.
I had a teacher in high school who believed Obama was the Antichrist.
Really?
Yes.
Now,
wow.
It's actually kind of an interesting thing. Barack Obama, after all this, is looking awfully good.
Right?
I mean, I have my disagreements with him still, but I'll be perfectly honest. If this was a three-way race, I'd vote for Barack Obama.
I think he's made it abundantly clear that he's done with all of this.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, if there was even an iota of hope, I would vote for him.
I mean, about the only thing he really has planned left for his presidency is he is going to try and get the TPP ratified as a lame duck.
I
mean, I wish him well in it. I really do, but I don't think it's going to happen.
Right. He's been called a lame duck for like the past year.
In a weird way, he kind of has been, just because of the extremely long focus on this election. I mean, if you guys think about it, we've been in this for almost 2 years now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I guess it has been weighing on my conscience that long. Yep.
I was watching a video of some trick-or-treaters visit the White House, and one of the trick-or-treaters was a lame duck. It was a duck with like a bunch of bandages and like a cast. And Obama was like yelling for Michelle. He's like, Michelle, it's a lame duck.
One of my favorite photos of Obama is when he sees a kid in a Pope costume, because he's just losing it, and you can tell that he can barely stand. He's laughing so hard, and I just thought that was funny. Anyway, do you guys want to talk about the third party candidates, or you just want to save that for your?
Are we done with Clinton?
We're obviously not talking about her.
That's right. We've gone to Obama now.
I feel like we
Obama
just want to avoid
2016.
her, honestly. Anyway.
It's hard to talk about Clinton in a lot of ways because Hillary Clinton now is a very different candidate from Hillary Clinton a year and a half ago.
Right, and no matter how we criticize her, her supporters will point to the other half of her record on the issue, so it's whatever.
Right. I mean, it's not unlike Donald Trump saying everything under the sun and contradicting himself. She's just had a much longer period of time in which to do it.
Mm-hmm. And she's far more tactful about it.
This is true.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about... No, I don't either. Okay.
You don't either.
Yeah, let's just go ahead and move on to Johnson, since he's the third highest polling.
Okay.
Oh, one thing we should hit, and I don't know if you guys have studied up on him much, but Evan McMullen.
Haven't. I heard he was extremely reasonable.
Yeah, I'd like to hit on him like as the last thing after Stein.
Okay.
'Cause he
Okay.
wasn't going to win much, but
Anyway, let's go ahead and
yeah,
talk
let's
about
hit
it.
Johnson.
Is this gonna be the 3 minutes? Should I?
No, I
or-
think we're going to do that as closing statements.
Oh,
I think this is
okay.
just our kind of group discussion thing, right, Austin?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm a little upset that he isn't a better candidate.
So am I, and I support him.
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of people who don't even hardly know anything about politics, and they all they'll say that the Weld, the vice presidential pick for the Libertarian Party, is a better candidate than Johnson.
I mean, he does have his issues as far as I'm concerned. He's maybe not as libertarian as I'd like on some issues, but at the same time, he's got a lot to recommend him. He is a real moderate, and he's someone who could really compromise. This being Weld, not so much Johnson, but
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm sorry, I was referring to Weld. I just want to make that clear.
I thought you were talking about Johnson.
No, that's why I wanted
So
to
you're
make it
like,
clear.
but and then you started talking.
Yeah.
He's had a few guffs, but nothing at all nearly as severe as anything Clinton or Trump has had. There was What is Aleppo, or he just kind of slipped up, had no context for a question, and once he kind of figured it all out, he had an answer, and it was okay. Then there's something else. I can't remember what it is.
Someone asked him to name a world leader that he admired, and he couldn't name a single living world leader.
However, I don't blame him, because I can't think of one either, and I actually have read up on a lot of them. I can't think of one that I truly admire.
You know, even if you couldn't think of anybody, just go with the Queen of England. I mean,
She's not truly a leader, though.
she isn't, but she is a figurehead, and I mean, no one hates Elizabeth II.
Yeah, that's a good
she's such a neutral person that it's hard to really dislike her. But
Fair
I mean,
enough.
be that as it may,
As a libertarian, I can't blame him, though. There's not really anyone like a libertarian around the world.
I
In
mean,
a world leader position.
I mean, Nick Clegg of the Liberal Democrats in the UK, where the word liberal means something very different than what it does here in our political context, but Nick Clegg is a pretty darned obscure leader.
that's a good point. All right, well, I would like to see his party succeed. I don't know that Johnson, I feel, should succeed, though compared to who he's running to, I hope he kind of does.
For what it's worth, Johnson did serve 2 very successful terms as an Arizona governor.
New Mexico.
New Mexico.
Which is, if I remember right, Democrat?
Correct. He was actually a Republican governor. He and Weld were both governors in the Republican Party in predominantly Democratic states. Johnson in New Mexico, and Weld, most impressively, in Massachusetts, which I'm sure we're all aware is an incredibly left-leaning state that's very, very progressive in the modern sense. Typically, and both of them had very successful governorships in those places.
Wow.
So
They did bring a sort of economic responsibility to each state. I mean, they're
Yeah.
both doing better than they were, when they took office.
Absolutely. They both reduced their state's debt. They curtailed spending without really cutting programs too much. I mean, they did cut some program spending, but mostly it was in administrative stuff. They didn't really reduce the service levels by a massive amount. I mean, they were reduced, but again, you do have to look at the overall impact. One thing I would kind of like to bring up about Johnson, not so much just as a candidate, but about his candidacy. He got asked very early on, because of course Gary Johnson does openly smoke marijuana for recreational purposes, and has been the head of a marijuana production company that produces for medical purposes. So he got asked very early on, about the use of cannabis and whether he'd smoke pot in the White House. And it seems to me as if that one issue just sort of ended up defining his candidacy. He ended up getting asked about it over and over and over again. And it didn't really seem like anyone was all that interested in his policies. It was just this issue of, well, you smoke weed.
I think it was just because it was easier to write him off that way.
Yeah, exactly. But it seems that people have been less interested in his policies than in fairly anecdotal stuff like that. And I mean, let's face it, statistical evidence shows that about half of all American adults will admit to smoking marijuana. We have to assume it's probably actually higher than that, since there are some who would never admit that. But it just isn't, it's a non-issue, really.
At this point it is. Well, for the most part. There are people that would just stay in their social group,
Sure.
say that they're against it. Anyway.
Sure. And there are people who are legitimately against it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think that's probably enough for Johnson. So let's go ahead and move on to Stein. My biggest problem with her is actually her VP pick.
I think that's everyone's biggest problem.
Yeah,
Well,
Jamu Baraka.
I think most people's biggest problem with her are things that aren't factually true, or that are factually true that have to do with economics.
Okay, that one, the last one, I'll sign on to. But.
Go ahead and talk about the VP though, Bryce.
Okay, our good friend Duncan here described Jamu Baraka, and I'll say this is very accurate in my opinion, as the black counterpart to Donald Trump. He is outrageous. He's described President Obama as an Uncle Tom. And, what else? He wants to increase taxes on the whites in benefit to minorities, specifically black people. Now, although I do believe his heart's in the right place, I do not believe that is at all the solution to any problem, unless the problem is give black people more money from white people. I don't know. He's not a politician. He's a social activist leader. He's way out of his reach here.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree with that. I think Jamu Baraka sees almost everything as a race issue, which, I mean, if you're a race issue activist, I suppose that is sort of the lens through which you learn to look at the world. But, even if you are very active in the racial relations area, you have to recognize that there are simply matters in this world that have nothing to do with race relations. I mean, he said almost nothing about economics, very little about foreign policy, except as it relates to race relations. So I think he views everything through a single lens, and that just isn't quite appropriate.
Moving to Stein.
Yeah, let's actually talk about the candidate.
I'm sorry, we had to make fun of Baraka for a minute.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he is a joke. We did talk about Weld, but in a much different light.
Weld isn't, as big a joke, though.
No, Weld's like the opposite. He's just slightly better.
All right, so Stein gets a lot of criticism for saying vaccines cause autism. The only problem with that is that's factually not true.
She never said it.
Never said it. I believe I've read a bit about this. I think it goes back to her days as an activist against mercury. It's contained in vaccines, and she wasn't okay with that. Mm-hmm. And people somehow latched onto that, saying, hey, vaccines are bad, so she must think they cause autism.
Right, and all she really said was that, more research and closer regulation, which, I mean, I guess I would still disagree with that because I think we have already an over-regulated pharmaceutical industry from the standpoint of production and bringing to market. But, that's all she really said. And people have attributed their own meaning to that in terms of, saying that she thinks that vaccines need more research and more regulation, ergo autism. And I don't think she even ever actually said the word autism in conjunction with that statement. It was a complete non sequitur for people who were saying that.
As far as gaffes or scandals go, still not nearly as severe or intense as Clinton or Trump, either in quality or quantity. I'd say probably, like, as far as seriousness goes, one step above
The Aleppo thing.
So what she did was in a protest for the Dakota Access Pipeline, which we did an episode on last Monday, which is really good. You should check it out. Plugins,
Self-plug, yeah.
She spray painted on a bulldozer in green paint. I'm assuming
Red paint.
Oh, it was red?
It was red, yes.
Oh, wow. I was way off.
Sorry.
No,
sorry to interrupt you, but...
That's okay. That's appropriate. I was wrong. She wrote, "I approve this message," and she was wanted by the police. So, I mean, yeah, she did break the law. It wasn't like a serious law, but, she did break the law. And so she should pay. I don't know if she did pay any sort of ticket for that or
That's
fine.
an absolute deal breaker for me.
Really?
It's juvenile behavior. She should know better. It's okay that she voiced her support for the protesters. It wasn't okay for her to blatantly break the law while running for public office. That was an honest to God deal breaker for me.
And I have to say that if I hadn't already kind of decided against her on her economic platform, I think that probably would have been for me as well, because I think that a respect for private property is probably one of the most critical elements any president in our democracy can have. So
I would say that the Native Americans at Standing Rock would agree with that.
But they weren't on
on
disputed land.
Let's
protest took place.
Let's go ahead and talk about our economics. I think the phrase that Duncan and I come back to is quantitative easing.
Correct. Now, Jill Stein actually has an interesting take on this because she correctly identifies, and I 100%, to my dying breath, agree with her on this. She correctly identifies that bailing out the big banks in 2008 was a bad idea. Businesses should stand or fail on their own. The government does not have a place in bailing out private business. I 100% agree with that. The problem is that she criticizes the fact that part of the bailout was paid for through the process of quantitative easing, which, just a basic explanation, quantitative easing effectively is printing money and purchasing bond securities with it. Effectively, what it does is it devalues each unit of currency within a currency system by a very small amount and broadens the currency base. So, she was against it on that. And again, I completely agree with her on that. The problem is she wants to then use the exact same process with the same ramifications to it to, I believe it's 1.4 trillion, but she wants to effectively eliminate student debt in this country. And Bryce, perhaps you can check me on that number. 1.4 trillion sound about right to you? Within her plan.
I don't know the number.
Okay. I want to say it's 1.4 trillion in student debt she plans to abrogate through the process of quantitative easing. And, I mean, we've seen processes like this, granted in much poorer countries, but the principles remain the same. Robert Mugabe's Zimbabwe, we've seen Chavez's Venezuela. Massive inflation occur because of currency printing. Granted, in our country, we have so much currency that the ramifications are significantly lower for the amount that she's talking about, but it's still a very bad precedent to set that you can pay for things by printing money.
I'm with Duncan, although I am a huge Stein supporter, and I even believe in free or at least more affordable college. I do not support this bailout of the student loan debt. Sorry, but you took those loans out knowing the cost. So, I mean, and then just as, as principal, you can't not bail out business, but then bail out private citizens. Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. What else can we talk about, Stein? Oh, well, I guess being part of the Green Party, One of her major platforms is taking care of the environment. She wants to be completely clean, renewable energy by 2030, not 2035.
Let's make that part of your closing statement.
Oh, okay.
Just talking points that you're not going to bring up there. I honestly think that without talking about your closing statement, that's most of what we're going to talk about. We talked about her biggest scandals, our biggest problems with her. Do you want to talk about Evan McMullin? That's his name?
Yeah. Evan McMullin is actually a Utah politician, and
Wasn't he part of the CIA?
I believe he did hold a position in that
Okay,
at one point.
that's what
yes.
I thought. That's kind of spooky.
But now, and I have to say this, I'm going entirely. I will say one thing. I'm going entirely off of his stated platform from his website. So that's all I have to go on here. Reading through that, he really is a comparative moderate. I mean, he is for sensible deregulation. He is for sensible pro-business, pro-growth policies, fairly liberal social policies in terms of just keeping the government away from, people's personal choices. The one thing I think a lot of people would have an issue with him on is he is being a Mormon. He is pro-life, so that's one thing I think people would probably get a little turned off by him. But again, across the board, a fairly moderate politician, and from what I have seen, there is at least some chance that he could actually scoop up Utah's electoral votes if everything were to really break his way. So Evan McMullin, and this is sort of why I wanted to bring him up, is he's not going to have any chance of winning the presidency, but he really could have a big impact if Clinton and Trump, which they've really narrowed in both the popular and the electoral vote in the last week, were he to somehow grab off Utah's electoral votes, he could very well send this thing to the House.
And if it goes to the House, he has an actual shot.
Possibly, yes. Although it seems fairly inconceivable that the House would pick somebody who was...
I think they'd go for a moderate other than Hillary because they hate her more than the devil.
And Donald Trump has actively campaigned against a lot of them, which is odd because, of course, in terms of the majority, they're mostly in his own party. But
right, and that's why they'd vote against him, is he's a loose cannon that they also hate.
Yeah, so
it
would be a very interesting scenario. And one thing I think we should hit on at some point during this is the tightening of this race, which I don't know if you guys have been keeping up with.
Yeah.
Too much.
Yeah, after the FBI released that, it kind of made her look even worse.
Yeah, it really
if that was possible, and incredibly poorly timed. Mm-hmm. I will say that I disagree with the decision. Isn't there a protocol against that?
There is a standing
60 days before the election.
Yeah.
And as much as I wish I would have known that 60 days ago, when it was technically allowed by protocol, I definitely affected the election in a huge way.
It definitely did, yeah.
No, never mind. I was going to talk about a loose conspiracy theory that I kind of came up with on my own, but I'm going to keep it to myself.
Make that a solo blog. All right, we're getting close to an hour long here, so let's go ahead and move on to closing statements. Which one of you wants to raise the hand to go first?
Should we flip a coin?
Oh, wait, did we not want to do Illinois and state politicians?
No, I guess not. I don't want to run too late.
Okay.
Okay, let's just go ahead and go. So, Johnson or Stein first? Or Libertarian versus Green? Who wants to...
You want me to go?
Yeah, if you don't mind.
Okay, I'll go. So
I'll start a timer. Go.
So the case for Gary Johnson is effectively that, flawed as he is, and gaffes though he has made that demonstrate he has little to no knowledge of foreign policy, which I completely agree is very, very concerning. He is actually for limited government, and that's something that we don't really have represented in our major political parties right now. There was a time that the Republicans were very much for the limitation of government, especially as it related to the individual. And at this point, with Donald Trump especially, we see an encroachment upon civil liberties. We see an encroachment upon economic liberties. Those are ideas that we need to have represented in our political system. And the Libertarian Party is well poised and at least well known enough that it has a shot at becoming a viable third party. So even though Johnson has his flaws, he does represent ideas on which our country was really founded and that still need to be represented within our political dialogue. My argument would be, don't vote for him as an individual, vote for his party and for the ideas which he and the party both represent. And, look at how he relates to people and to government as opposed to Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, whose solutions always seem to include more government, more intervention, more regulation. The government cannot keep growing at that rate. It's not a sustainable model, and eventually it does simply lead to a situation in which people have very few private rights and very little privacy. I think that's something we need to restore in this country, and that's why I support the Johnson-Weld ticket and more broadly the Libertarian Party. I would also encourage people to look at libertarians at the local and the state level because, you do need people who are at lower levels to implement those policies and to make the party successful.
Okay, and Bryce for the Green Party?
That was under 2 minutes. Good job. By 2 seconds. All right, I'm not going to do Stein as much justice as he did Johnson, but if I can, I believe that Stein is the second most conservative candidate on the ticket, of course, behind Johnson. She does want to increase taxes on the rich, but she does also want to decrease a lot of government spending. She wants to decrease military spending by at least 50%. I talked a little bit about the deprivatizing of prisons, which would save a lot of money because prisoners cost a heck of a lot of money, and these are organizations that make money off of having more prisoners in them for longer periods of time. She wants to increase or help privacy of citizens. So, all the Edward Snowden stuff, just help you guys keep your privacy. I'm trying to think. Oh, she wants to help with the environment as much as she can. I talked about making America all renewable energy by 2030. And also, finally, breaking up bigger banks and things like that. Things that Bernie supporters love. In my opinion, if you don't vote for Stein, everything that Bernie worked for is for nothing. And also, everything that FDR worked for is almost in vain. If we go back now, especially if we go towards, say, Trump or Hillary, all of that was just for nothing. That's it.
Okay. I will say that I refuse to vote for Trump or Clinton. I understand I'm probably going to get a backlash for that. I think they're both intolerable. And I understand most people say, well, lesser of two evils. I don't believe in that. I think you should vote for a candidate because you believe in their policies, not because you believe in them specifically, which kind of puts me at odds with why I voted for Sanders in the primaries. I think we need a candidate that is willing to compromise because our Congress and our country is in turmoil almost. When it comes to understanding each other, we've cut off dialogue. We just want it one way or the other. There's no compromise. So I'd like to see a candidate work towards that. And unfortunately, I don't really see one. I think that I'm probably going to vote for Johnson when I go to the booth. I really hope a third-party candidate has a chance, even though I know they probably don't. But that's about it, honestly. We have anything else? I think that's all we had planned, right?
I guess only thing I'd like to say is if you're listening to this, get out and vote.
Yes, please vote.
Yeah. No matter who you're voting for, actually go to the polls and, use your little slice of democracy to voice your opinion.
Don't forget to vote down ballot, too.
Mm-hmm. If I can add something, also, if you're not old enough yet, I imagine that a lot of our listeners aren't, or if you are, go, just run for office. If you think that you can do a better job, if you think you could represent people like Austin who are just really depressed and don't have a politician that represents them, go out and run and make a difference. And then vote for yourself.
Well, I think that's all that's on the mind for the presidential race. So we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.